place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have to choose those words carefully too, city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed, children being killed every day with Putin's missiles.
Poland was one of the EU countries that, was hesitant to take in refugees. Talk about what has changed and the different position now.
Well, just to put it bluntly, these are not refugees from Syria. These are refugees from neighboring Ukraine. And that, quite frankly, is part of it. These are Christians, they're white, they're very similar.
These are prosperous, I'm loath to use the expression, these are prosperous middle-class people. These are not obviously refugees trying to get away from areas in the Middle East that are still in a big state of war. These are not people trying to get away from areas in North Africa. They look like any European family that you would live next door to.
Now the unthinkable has happened to them. And this is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe.
Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Very excited after my vacation to see my good old friends, Representative Chris Rabb from Philadelphia, representing Northwest Philly, and the one and only Arun Chaudhary in what place unknown. Are you in Germany? I feel like that's
I'm actually back in Berlin. I'm in the studio. I'm in the studio. And I actually wanted to just quickly check in with Rabb. How did all that turn out? You are in the same district and all this?
Oh, right. Redistricting. Let's update our redistricting
yeah, where do we land
occurred.
On that? Just so that we introduce you correctly. Who knows?
I have been able to retain 85% of my district. And I get to keep my district number, which is 200, which I'm excited about.
Yeah.
Did you notice how I didn't say your district number? I was like, oh, maybe it's not 200 anymore.
Right. You didn't know what it was. I didn't know either.
That's subtle politicking, guys.
So, yes, it is largely the community I've represented for the past 3 terms. Unfortunately, I am the only House Democrat out of 90 who is forced to run against a fellow Democratic incumbent. So that's a little
feelings will be hurt.
Unfortunate.
But you got most of the districts, so sorry, buddy.
Yeah, there's other ways to serve the public. Everybody needs to remember that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you could have a show on YouTube. That's how you do it. You could knock on doors. You could give money. You could do all the things. All right, guys, let's do some comments on that video. It has been making the rounds, a lot of these, the media bias, but in the chat, you had some thoughts and feelings. So lots of media bias about the refugees. Now, I'm of the perspective that refugees are refugees are refugees. So I believe in supporting refugees, especially in a conflict. But the media, clearly shown their bias there. I don't understand. To me, reporters who are on the ground are more sensitive usually to dynamics, but it just seems like I don't know. They're out to let Rabb. You wanted to vomit, so give me your thoughts.
Well, I mean, it's not dog whistle. It's straight up transparency about whose lives they value more, based on how they look, who they identify with. And, this is not a surprise to many folks. It is just a reinforcement of, what we see in mainstream media and corporate media, such that it is saying out loud what many folks have been saying quietly, that if these are folks who you wouldn't want as neighbors, even if they were U.S. citizens, you sure as heck don't want them as refugees. And we live in a nation that has extraordinary racial segregation. I actually serve a neighborhood that has been intentionally racially integrated for over 60 years. And we can probably count on 2 hands across this country of 325 million people how many intentionally racially integrated neighborhoods there are. Yeah. So in many ways, this is a reflection of the racial segregation and the mores of a lot of white folk who are feeling a sense of urgency and compassion with folks who who they identify with racially. And they, I think, are very excited to show their humanity to folks who look like them. But that also calls them out for the very same thing about where are they with Yemen and Syria, et cetera.
And I would jump on the top of that, just sort of, we've talked before on the show, the kind of different definitions of racism and how they kind of can creep out in European versus American politics. And I think here we have just a classic, also kind of slippery definition of whiteness that is only defined by people who are in the club. So now we're including, in our World War II fantasy fiction, we're including Ukrainians in the club. They weren't in the club when they were looking for jobs. When they were in London looking around, so it really, this sort of sliding scale of who is and who isn't in the white club is just Orwellian, the way that it shifts around from day to day.
I've mentioned this earlier in the show. My best friend works in Switzerland for an NGO. We met in freshman year of college studying international relations, and then she really upped it several notches from me. I'm just on little YouTube, and she's actually working in very conflict zones all over the planet. But she's worked in Ukraine twice, and I know you have too, Arun. One thing she said to me when she saw these clips as an American was, she said, the uncomfortable truth that a lot of not just Europeans, there is definitely class and racism in Europe, especially in whiter parts of Europe. When I say whiter, I mean like Anglo-Saxon waspy land. Hope I'm not offending anybody in the global north. Well, I mean, yeah, you that's what it is. Italy in the global south. You would include Greece in the global south, but Southern Europe excluded, I guess. So she said to me, she says, Ukraine, post-Soviet states, the uncomfortable truth is there is very aggressive racism there that they have not, because democracy is fairly new, it's the Eurasian nationalism is still deeply in the blood and culture. And there hasn't been a lot of work to really disentangle that from society that maybe other countries, have been working on, are not necessarily successful, but are at least conscious of. Arun, you worked in Ukraine. Do you have a similar sense of this?
I think things are different rather than sort of being like the democratic experiment somehow gives people a head start on this. I think Western and Northern Europe had successfully exported a lot of their racial misery to their colonies. And when it comes to Eastern Europe, you have a place where they had no place to put that. And so a lot of it ends up mixing in of itself. I mean, this is also a place where you've had just such a deep, yes, as you say, sort of deep ethnic, sort of xenophobic feelings, I think, during the Second World War and before. You see people weaponizing history on both sides of the line in this way, in a way that kind of belies the fact that this part of the world has been very volatile as borderlands in between often more stable areas become, and that over and over again, we have seen the kind of, whether it is about anti-Semitism or about anti-immigrant activity, we see it being weaponized. You saw in Belarus, Lukashenko literally inviting folks in the Middle East just to use as sort of infantrytic bodies to throw against the fence with Poland, right? Sort of in a bizarre move. You see now, folks in Poland, preventing some certain people from fleeing over the border, etc. You see the same thing happening in Russia, and you see people on both sides weaponizing that. They're being super racist, pointing their fingers, and the people who are suffering are, of course, marginalized people.
Of course. So I'm glad that you mentioned Poland, and I know you probably have a lot of thoughts on this. This is so weird. Matteo Salvini, he is the mayor of, help me out here, Arun.
No, he's an MP, but he's the head of La Lega. So he is, the head of what formerly is probably the largest national party in Italy. And then he went to, and it was the mayor of Pollenzy.
He visited the mayor. Sorry.
He visited the mayor in Poland. And then, yes, please tell us what happened. This is beautiful.
Oh, no, that's so much. So he's the head of this. And he went to the Poland-Ukraine border, and the mayor of I can't say it.
A typical Polish name to say.
Przemysl shows him the Putin admiring T-shirt he wore while he was in Moscow. So can we enhance that a little bit?
Yeah.
Za osoba, którą określa pan jako swojego przyjaciela zrobiła i co tak naprawdę zrobiła tym ludziom, którzy tutaj ilości 50 000 dziennie przekracza granicę. Prosiłbym, żebyśmy wspólnie pojechali. Właśnie pojedziemy zaraz do ośrodka dla uchodźców i pojedziemy na granicę, jeżeli będzie pan w tej koszulce. Zapraszam panie senator.
Thank you, sir. You have a chance to condemn Putin right now. Yes.
Grazie.
I mean, is this guy just going rogue?
I mean, I think Salvini took a big chance thinking that something like this wasn't going to happen. And there is some domestic Italian politics to talk about here. So, you know, Salvini, who was the sort of unstoppable right-wing strongman, best friends with Bannon, you know, made La Lega national party, all of a sudden look like he would be the new thing in Italy, suffered a string of 3 electoral defeats in a row. And then just with this presidential election in Italy, had basically everyone not follow him in the right-wing coalition, has really fallen on his face. And I think the only thing a politician like him knows how to do is show up. And so he was like, all right, I have a Putin problem. I need to be able to show up someplace. It was risky. He was like, maybe this works out for me. And I think you could see in his face the sort of sadness. It was like, yeah, this was definitely a 20% chance of happening. And the mayor really had nothing to lose here. I don't think this was even a particularly risky move. It was like, yeah, when that guy comes, I'm going to do this.
I mean, the mayor, though, I mean, Poland, I mean, this is extraordinarily complicated. It's not like the head of state. I mean, maybe that's Poland's way of kind of having it both ways, being part of the EU and condemning Putin, but also having their local leaders show up who have nothing to lose, you know, wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah, against a guy who doesn't have a lot of national power or say in Italy now anyway, but is still a figure. It's sort of a perfect way to get around that without ruffling real diplomatic feathers.
Okay, so this is important. I want to get both of your perspectives on this because Putin. We've talked to reporters earlier this morning. I was on Ben's show, and there was a reporter from Kiev Independent talking about how Putin really hasn't lost his mind. I don't believe that. I think he's always been a little bit off, but I think the difference is now he's unpredictable because he might be forced into a corner. And what happens if he's forced into a corner? I'm not sure if we're already there yet. The fact that I had that perspective and then I read Thomas Friedman's article this morning and an echo that I was like, oh my God, no, this is bad. I don't like where we are right now. Like, let me rethink this. But seeing that and seeing how that even in countries that are are aligning and probably will continue to align with the EU and NATO, there are fissures in those countries, larger fissures than say the ones that we have here. Is really in a corner, and you know, will his autocratic friends bail him out? I mean, the economy of Texas, of Russia, is the size of Texas. They're cutting off all avenues of being able to continue this war through funds. What's the way out? And his it's almost like the out is the nuclear option, which I hate to say that, but this is exactly what these kinds of scenarios are. Why we practice these scenarios when we're in schools is for these moments. I don't know, Rabb, I mean, politics is politics is politics. Do you see an out for him? And do you think that we're making the right move?
I'm not quite sure. I wish I knew for certain, but this is unprecedented. And our relationship with Russia and Putin will be forever changed. And this is not a drill, right? This is real, and this is the price of imperialism and global capitalism and reliance upon fossil fuels, right? Because this latest ban on Russian imports, that's not to the EU, that's to the US, right? Because we couldn't sustain that if it were just it runs on fracked gas, right?
Right.
There's some level of energy independence that the U.S. can maintain, and so it has to be. This is the inherent challenge with this global market, right? Is that there's an interdependence in the worst ways that double down on all the things we know as citizens, as scientists, are going to destroy the planet. And yet we can't actually put into full force sanctions because our consumerism and our dependence on these things as societies. So if there was ever a time to understand the global imperative to transition to renewable energy and get off of our addiction of fossil fuels, well, it's been we certainly are being reminded right now. But Putin is a sociopath, and I don't know how you reason with a sociopath. And the same with oligarchs. And just as there are Russian oligarchs, there are American oligarchs. So we should not be referring to American billionaires. We should be referring to them as oligarchs as well.
Better branding.
Just like we have to use the same frame across
and
the
they're
board.
invested together. I mean, how many of our tech companies have received money from these oligarchs? Whether it's Facebook, a very famous Russian oligarch was one of the early big funders of Facebook, and many other platforms. Real estate all over the world has been affected. We are intertwined with post-Soviet oligarchs who basically seized everything from Russia when the Soviet Union fell and turned it into a mob state. Arun, I want to get your thoughts, but I also want to play this clip about the nuclear dynamic, because it's just I can't believe we're even discussing this at this point in society, but maybe we should have been for much longer. Let's play this clip.
There's been a lot of corruption. It's a lot of hollowing out. And one thing we should be very, very wary of and aware of is that in these military reforms Russia has been undertaking in the last few years, they've incorporated tactical battlefield nuclear weapons. They've integrated that into their military doctrine. These are lower yield nuclear weapons that can be used in the battlefield quite early on into conventional warfare. My fear is the more his conventional forces are shown up as hollow, demoralized, underfunded, the more that option becomes a viable one in Putin.
Arun, you're there in Europe.
Yeah.
Tension. You can probably feel the tension. You can probably feel Putin's breath on your neck right now. How much is this weighing on your mind?
I mean, I think like generally having lots of tactical small nuclear weapons around, someone eventually uses one when they feel like they need to. And it's hard to sort of pin that on exactly where in the world it will happen. But that's what will happen, right? A very small regional thing. And then we'll see if the world freaks out or if they don't, right? They're like, yeah, it was a small one. And actually, if you look at it, it was worse than the firebombing of Dresden, or whatever comparison, thing will start to happen. But I do think the sort of ratcheting up of the rhetoric, and I'll pull this back into answering the last question at the same time, is part of the thing and is sort of part of the pressure tactic, because as much as sort of on Twitter, everyone yelling "Hail Ukraine" or whatever, I think the Putin, especially Lavrov and these sort of experienced folks over there, really do see where the fault lines are in Europe and see where those things are. And it's not just petrodollars. A lot of it is, for sure. But we had this exact same conversation when I think, Nomi, you mentioned in a hopeful way, I heard there's just going to be this global tax, a global sales tax, or a global, that sounds great. How is that all going to work? And it's like, well, it's not going to work because everyone in Europe gets their carve out. Already, once we're past this initial crisis phase, you have seen the different European countries ask for special carve-outs in sanctions. The Italians would still like to sell handbags to the Russians, please. The Dutch would still like to handle, fresh flowers. Everyone has their special thing, jewelry for other people, diamonds, like everybody has something. And by the time you're done picking away at this about everybody's interests, you realize that as much as we do have, right, this kind of cold warriors trying to fight a bipolar situation in a multipolar world, even as all of that confusion is happening, that somehow on both sides of this, we see the same companies.
Well, we see the same companies, but I mean, right before I came on today, I was watching a report on the list of companies that have decided that they're no longer, they're divesting, they're boycott, whatever the relationship, disentangling themselves from the Russian marketplace. In many cases, this obviously affects civilians. We're going to have somebody on who's a Twitch streamer who can't access her Twitch funds from Russia, and she can't be openly critical of Putin because she could go to jail for 12 years, but she can't access her funds through the marketplace right now. And not to mention that the ruble is worth less than a penny. So, there's the effect on the citizens of Russia, whether they support this war or not. But there's also different types of relationships. So in this segment I saw discussing the different companies, each of them have decided to divest in very specific ways. Some sort of like
super specific, right?
Yes, exactly. Like completely pulling out, temporarily closing, Details. I mean, it's the sausage, right? It's the sausage and the optics. But regardless, it's still pressure, right? They're still trying to pressure him as much.
There's an enormous amount of economic pressure coming down on both Russia and Belarus right now. Absolutely.
And where do you think it's going to go?
I think it does. I don't think it leads towards enough of an instability to destabilize the Russian government. I think a lot of people are kind of looking for that to happen. I don't think that's what happened. I think, I often talk about the number one, lever in political communication is not outrage or fear; it's loss aversion. But that the trick is, that's why inflation is so sticky, right? My money's worth a little less today than it was yesterday. Like something's happening and I can't control it. But also it happens with dignity. And I feel like the communications war that you see happening now is so much about dignity and not about these economic hardships and coming through it, that it is sort of painting a different narrative. And I think this is really a communications war being fought not on Twitter or on Facebook and the places where we're used to seeing it, but it's being fought on Telegram and places where, folks in the region are much more often. And it's incredible to be subscribed to different sides, different Telegram channels during this war and to see the exact same clips with different captions. Like, the kind of just amount of information being put out in real time, disinformation putting out in real time, counter information to the disinformation put out in real time. We are seeing something happening here, something that is very real.
I mean, the day of the attacks, or like the day after, I opened up my Telegram and it was like 30 new people had signed up. A good chunk of them do work actively in democratic politics. That was very interesting to see. Rabb, do you think there's a way out? Where do you think this goes?
I just remember being, how old was I? 30 years old at the German Marshall Fund. I was an American Marshall Memorial Fellow, and I was one of 18 Americans between the ages of 28 and 40 who were traveling across Europe for a month. We traveled to 5-6 countries and learned about their different political, cultural, economic systems. This was right before 9/11. So this was, wow. This was a long time ago. And I had never been to Europe before. And it really dawned on me how both international and insular Europe is, how in close quarters folks are, how much history there is, how much the borders mean in terms of national identity and the complexities and nuances associated with nationality, and what it means to be European, and what were the proxies for Europeanness, and who should be allowed in NATO. And I know Turkey was like, and a lot of this was around whiteness that was never talked about. And I remember asking folks when I was in, I'm trying to remember, I think I was in Prague. I asked multiple times. I wanted to meet some Roma community members. And they're like, why the hell would you want to meet those people? Totally. They just looked at me like I had misspoken, like I was crazy. And I'm like, I'm Black. Of course I want to meet them. And they were just shocked. And some of the Roma folk who I met were shocked that I asked to meet them. They're like, what's this about? And it just reminds me of how fragile all of these things are, these relationships, these dynamics, and how it influences everything. And I don't know how we're going to come out of this, but we will not be the same. And what I'm hoping for is that more conversations like this happen, because we have this thing where people just jump on the bandwagon and say, we're with Ukraine. And I get it. They need our support. But all refugees, all victims of imperialism and all the isms, militarism, etc., they all need our help. And we need to understand how they're all connected. And by being silent about some issues and loud about others tells a lot about us. And we have to do better. And that conversation is not going to be led in corporate media. It's going to be led by folks like you and folks on the front lines, so that we can have a higher level of civic literacy, so that we don't buy what the corporate duopoly is talking about in Congress, and also what they're trying to sell us on mainstream media.
I think that's so well said. I think that, like, you know, the real trick is to be able to have the real debate, which is so important, about what a multipolar world is going to look like, and how to have just outcomes in that world. But we can't do that with the media continuing to be able to just dump these jingoistic tropes on us. It all feels so familiar. You know, we're all old enough now to have done this a few times, and it's like, whoa, this is what it feels like to get old, huh?
If all that comes out of this is Russia bad, we've lost.
Yeah, Tolstoy bad. That's all we're gonna get. Yeah.
Tolstoy bad. Yeah, banning Russian literature. Not what we're looking for here, guys. I do want to recognize my grandmother, because she was a refugee, and my whole family was. She passed away on March 4th, 2017, and her funeral was March 8th, if I believe, 2017, and it was International Women's Day, and she was the matriarch of the family, who brought in multiple refugees. She was from Albania, so when the wall fell, hundreds of family members she took care of. But on the day of her funeral, when we were speaking, was the day that the Trump Muslim ban went into effect, and it was, you know, here we are 5 years later, and having the same conversation. So I when I see refugees from wherever, I think of my grandmother. It didn't matter. They'd come into the church, whether they were Somalian, Orthodox members of the church, she would take them in, and you know, it doesn't matter. Just once you have
no
that,
means testing, right?
No means
Come on,
testing.
folks. We can do better than this. Yeah.
Well, also, if you come from that, there's a sensitivity to it too. So, you know, that's why I was really shocked by these reporters who've been around so many different situations, and to be that numb. Yeah, I guess it dehumanizes you too. Rep Rabb, good luck at your speech.
Thank you. I was supposed to have attended. I wanted to attend a rally about 75 miles away. The great folk that shut down Burke's coalition had a rally at the Immigrant Detention Center in central PA, and our Democratic governor has not acted on trying to shut it down. And I think it's important to say that, you know, this is not just an international issue. There are people among us who are asylees, who are refugees, who need support, and we have to understand the apparatus in which they're caught up in that transcends Trump, that was furthered under multiple administrations and fomented under the Clinton administration, where we have mass deportation, when we have criminalizing of Black and brown immigrants. These things are at the core of all the sickness that we are embracing in this nation, and we can't make this a partisan issue. This is so much bigger than that. And if we make it Trump bad, therefore we let everyone else off the hook, and we remove the historiography and the genealogy of all these decisions that continue to plague each new marginalized community. So we have to do ourselves a solid and learn about how all of this is interconnected, to figure out what is the one thing I can do back at home, because we all feel so helpless so often. What can we do? And it could just be helping those in need who are in our own backyard, who suffer from the same systems of oppression.
Well said.
Yeah.
Arun, final thoughts?
No, I just hope a good discussions like this, because there is a principled, anti-war stability and sustainability plan for this planet. And when it's the only way to stop war is to build a coal plant, I sort of feel like I don't have a lot to go on there.
Yeah. Stay safe.
said.
I'm just going to say this. Stay safe. I don't know what you could do to stay safe, but when people say that, I'm just like, you're like, great.
Find a way and do that.
Yeah.
Get underneath your desk the way that they did in the 50s, because that surely was going to work.
This is as a nice heavy desk, and of course, Oscar the Puffin will be with me.
You're protected by Oscar. All right, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for a fantastic show. Great conversations, great guests. Always appreciative. I'm glad to be back and here with you guys. Rep Rabb, good luck. Arun, good night, because it's very late there. Thank you to you all. You can become a member if you join us at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. It goes a long way. We are independent media, as you know, so we don't have all the big bucks coming in. We have to do this on our own time, our own way. We're a tight team. Try to get incredible guests, experts on, and have deeper conversations about complicated issues that you can't just hashtag. That's what you get with us.